The soft buzz of conversation filled the private dining room, a luxurious space hidden away in the back of Meridian, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. Candlelight flickered off the crystal glasses and polished silverware, casting a golden glow over everyone seated at the long walnut table. It was supposed to be a night of celebration. 10 years of marriage, countless memories, a future built side by side. Or so I believed. I sat there, swirling the deep amber whiskey in my glass, smiling faintly as Victoria leaned over to whisper something to her father. Richard Blackwood chuckled under his breath, a sound that made my stomach twist unexpectedly. But I brushed it off. It was our anniversary. Maybe he was finally warming up to me. Maybe tonight would mark a new chapter. Maybe I should have known better. The server approached, carrying a silver tray with a neatly tied envelope resting on top. Confused, I set my glass down and accepted it, feeling the weight of the moment shift. Victoria stood up beside me, her napkin dropping from her lap onto the floor without her even noticing. There was something different in her posture. A tension, a cruelty barely hidden beneath the poised smile she offered the room. She lifted her champagne flute and tapped it lightly with her fork, commanding everyone's attention. The room fell silent, dozens of faces turning toward us, expecting a romantic speech, a toast to love. Instead, Victoria's voice sliced through the air like a dagger. "We're done," she said coldly, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Happy anniversary." I blinked at her, at the envelope in my hands, fingers tightening around the thick stack of papers inside. Divorce papers. She had orchestrated this moment, planned it down to the second. The gasps from the guests were immediate, followed by a ripple of uncomfortable murmuring. I barely heard it over the rush of blood pounding in my ears. "And by the way," she added with a vicious smile, "my dad's promoting Jason, yes, Jason, my ex, in your place." The world tilted slightly. Jason. The same Jason she used to cry over when we first started dating. The same Jason who couldn't hold a steady job for more than a year. I stared at her, stunned, my mind struggling to stitch the pieces together. Richard stood up, towering over me with a smirk that radiated smug triumph. "Pack your trash," he said, his voice loud and clear, making sure there was no room for confusion. "Clean out your desk tomorrow morning." The betrayal settled into my bones like ice water. Around me, the so-called friends, business partners, and distant relatives shifted uncomfortably, some pretending to study their plates, others whispering behind cupped hands. Victoria and Richard didn't even pretend to feel shame. They turned together, linking arms, laughing as they walked out of the dining hall, leaving me standing there with an open envelope and the taste of humiliation burning the back of my throat. I stayed still for a long moment, feeling the weight of 100 eyes digging into my skin. I could see the pity on some faces, the amusement on others. To them, I had just been publicly gutted, thrown away like a broken toy no longer useful to the spoiled child who once demanded it. My hands trembled slightly, but not from sadness. No, something else was rising inside me, something slow, deliberate, and cold. I carefully placed the envelope back onto the silver tray, straightened my jacket, and offered the remaining guests a tight, humorless smile. Without a word, I stepped away from the table, my shoes tapping sharply against the marble floor as I crossed the room. Let them talk. Let them whisper. Their laughter would die in their throats soon enough. Outside, the night was brisk, the city lights blurring into streams of gold and red against the dark sky. I pulled my coat tighter around me and started walking, each step solid and certain. They thought they had buried me tonight, thought they had humiliated me beyond recovery. They had no idea. They didn't know about the man beneath the tailored suits and polite smiles. They didn't know about the years I spent preparing for the possibility that love and loyalty could turn to poison. They didn't know that the man they humiliated tonight wasn't the fool they thought he was. No. The real fool's game had just begun, and I was the only one holding the deck. As I disappeared into the night, away from the glittering restaurant and its poisoned memories, I felt something inside me shift permanently. I wasn't walking away from my marriage. I wasn't walking away from Blackwood Industries. I was walking towards something bigger, something inevitable. They had set the fire, but I was the one who was going to control how it burned. And when the flames finally died down, they would be the ones left choking on the smoke. I didn't go home that night. Home was no longer a place for me. It was a stage that Victoria had dressed up for years, a place full of expensive furniture and empty promises. Instead, I took a different route, one that no one at that dinner could have guessed existed. My driver, a man named Wells, who knew better than to ask questions, picked me up 2 blocks away under the cover of darkness. I slid into the back seat of the blacked-out SUV and simply said, "Office," but not the Blackwood Industries office, the one with the glass walls and fake prestige they thought to find me. No, I meant the real one, the one hidden behind 2 dummy corporations and 3 layers of legal insulation, the one I built before Victoria even knew my name. We drove through the city, away from the glittering skyscrapers and 5-star restaurants, cutting down side streets and into the industrial district. Wells pulled up to an unassuming warehouse where a single security light buzzed quietly overhead. No logos, no names, nothing to give away what was inside. I punched in the code on the keypad by the steel door and stepped inside. The heavy door thudded shut behind me, sealing out the world. The interior was nothing like the grimy exterior suggested. Gleaming floors, modern glass partitions, state-of-the-art tech humming softly in the background. Screens lined one wall, displaying market trends, offshore account statuses, project developments, and the latest movements of the companies under my umbrella. Talon Ventures, a name known only to a few, and never connected to me. I walked through the halls, my shoes echoing faintly until I reached my office. Sleek, minimalist, powerful. I sat behind the wide steel and oak desk and pressed my fingerprint to the sensor hidden under the surface. Instantly, the secured systems unlocked and a detailed dashboard spread across the 3 massive monitors in front of me. I leaned back in my chair and let the truth settle into my bones like a second skin. Before I ever met Victoria, before Richard Blackwood ever looked down his nose at me, I had already built something greater than they could ever comprehend. While I played the obedient executive at Blackwood Industries, dutifully climbing the ladder at a pace they mocked, Talon Ventures had grown into a quiet empire. Hotels, tech startups, medical research firms, logistics companies, investment portfolios scattered across jurisdictions that most people couldn't even pronounce, let alone locate on a map. Shell companies nested within holding companies, each layer protecting the next, each thread leading nowhere visible. And they thought they could destroy me with a divorce and a job termination. They had no idea who they were playing with. I leaned forward, fingers steepled in front of my mouth, breathing in the controlled, clean air of the office. My mind clicked into place with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. For too long, I had played small, hidden behind a facade of modest success to protect what truly mattered. But now, they had ripped away the mask I let them believe was my face. They had drawn first blood. It was only fitting that I responded in kind. I pulled up Victoria's financials first. In the months leading up to our anniversary, she had been quietly moving money into offshore accounts, likely thinking she could squirrel away a comfortable nest egg before dropping the hammer. Cute and predictable. She had no idea that every keystroke she made on her devices was being mirrored to a system I controlled. I smiled grimly. The funds would be inaccessible by morning. Next, Richard Blackwood. His grip on Blackwood Industries had always been tighter than a fist clenched in rage, but with control came arrogance, and with arrogance came mistakes. I had quietly documented every shady deal he thought he was clever enough to bury. Shell contracts, insider trading communications, bribery trails to overseas contractors, all neatly stored, categorized, and ready to be deployed. And Jason. Poor, stupid Jason. I didn't even need to dig for him. His criminal record, hastily sealed in another state, was already flagged in my archives. Embezzlement, misappropriation of client funds, and a history of charming his way into promotions he couldn't possibly sustain. They thought replacing me with him was an upgrade. I chuckled under my breath, a sound sharp and humorless. They hadn't just played themselves. They had handed me every tool I needed to dismantle them entirely. Legally, publicly, irrevocably. I sat back and stared at the screens, my reflection faint in the glass. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of pretending. I didn't feel the exhaustion of carrying a marriage that had become more about optics than love. I didn't feel the constant pressure of balancing my real empire against the stage show of Blackwood Industries. I felt free. It wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't even about anger. Not really. It was about setting the record straight, about making sure that when the dust settled, everyone would know the truth. I had never been the fool. I had simply been the man patient enough to let them reveal who they really were. I activated a secure conference call. "Liam, Sophia, Gabriel," I said, voice cutting through the quiet. "We start tonight. No hesitation. No second chances." Liam Reynolds, my right-hand strategist, answered immediately. "What's the play?" I stared at the screen, heart steady, mind sharper than it had ever been. "We take back everything they think they stole," I said, "and then we take everything they still think they own." The call clicked off in the quiet of my real office. As the systems hummed and the screens pulsed with data, I allowed myself a small, cold smile. The man they tried to destroy no longer existed. The man they had created in his place. He was about to burn their entire world to the ground. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight as I leaned over the conference table, the glow of multiple monitors throwing sharp shadows across the room. Liam Reynolds was the first to arrive, sliding into a chair across from me with a small nod. Sharp-eyed and methodical, Liam had once been an elite strategist for one of the top consulting firms in the world before he realized he could make 10 times as much working in the shadows with me. Next came Sophia Cruz, her laptop already open before she even set her coffee down. Sophia was a magician when it came to cybersecurity, a woman who could breach the tightest encrypted systems while sipping a latte and making dinner plans. Last was Gabriel Bishop, carrying a heavy briefcase and a grin that said he'd been waiting for this call for months. Gabriel wasn't flashy. He was quiet, patient, and terrifyingly effective at making financial problems disappear, or appear, depending on what the situation demanded. We didn't waste time. I tapped a few keys, pulling up the targets on the main monitor. "Victoria, Richard, Jason," I said, the names almost tasting bitter as they left my mouth. "They think they buried me tonight. They have no idea they just handed me the shovel." Liam leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, eyes gleaming with the thrill of the game. "What's the angle? Public destruction or quiet dismantling?" "Both," I said without hesitation. "We hit them where it hurts first, their pride, their wallets, their sense of control. Then we let the rest crumble under the weight of their own arrogance." Sophia smirked. "I've already set up shadow tracing on Victoria's accounts. She tried moving a significant amount offshore. It'll be frozen within the next 2 hours. She won't even realize it until she tries to buy her next designer handbag." Gabriel slid a file across the table. "Richard's supply chain is a house of cards. Most of his key vendors have exit clauses tied to executive misconduct. You give the signal and we activate the clauses. His production line grinds to a halt within 48 hours. "And Jason?" Liam asked, raising an eyebrow. I smiled grimly. "Jason has skeletons he thought were buried deep. I have certified court records of his past embezzlement. I'll make sure the right people see them." It wasn't just about revenge. It was about control. It was about making sure they learned a lesson in humiliation they would never forget. They had spent years painting me as the dependable workhorse, steady, quiet, loyal. They thought that made me weak. They mistook silence for submission. Tonight, they would find out that the man they underestimated had been building something far greater than anything they could comprehend. We broke the tasks down methodically. Sophia would breach Blackwood Industries' internal communications, mapping out the private conversations between board members, documenting every whispered conspiracy, every off-the-record deal they thought was safe. Gabriel would prepare the financial traps, ensuring that once we pulled the rug, they wouldn't have a penny to stand on. Liam would coordinate the overall timeline, making sure each strike hit in perfect sequence, like a symphony of collapse. As we finalized the initial moves, the weight that had pressed against my chest all evening began to lift. For the first time in months, I wasn't reacting to Victoria's lies or Richard's contempt. I wasn't trying to play catch-up to their manipulations. I was setting the stage, and they would be the unwilling actors in a play they didn't even know had started. First move, I said, turning to Liam. Supplier exits. We send the notices before noon. No advanced warnings, no negotiations. He nodded, already typing into his tablet. Sophia, leak just enough information about Jason's past to key shareholders. Let it fester over the weekend. By Monday, I want internal investigations opened. Already working on it, she said, barely glancing up. Gabriel, it's Victoria's discretionary accounts first. Then start tightening the pressure on Richard's liquidity. Don't make it obvious. Let them think it's bad luck. He gave a rare smile. They won't know whether to blame the market, their mistakes, or each other. Good. Confusion would breed panic, and panic would make them sloppy. I stared at the screen showing the smiling faces from the anniversary dinner, frozen in time. Victoria raising her glass, Richard sneering, Jason grinning like a jackal. For years, I had smiled for them. I had lowered my head, played the beautiful son-in-law, the trustworthy employee, the forgettable man in the background. No more. They wanted a war they thought they could win. They didn't understand that the battlefield was mine, that I had drawn the map long before they even realized a war was coming. Every deal I made, every meeting I attended, every favor I collected, it had all been part of a much bigger plan they couldn't begin to comprehend. The clock ticked over to 2 a.m. as the first batch of encrypted messages went out to Blackwood Industries' suppliers, triggering the exit clauses. Contracts evaporated. Delivery schedules collapsed. Richard's finely tuned machine began to sputter, unseen but inevitable. I watched it unfold with a calm heart and a steady hand. Across the city, while Victoria celebrated with her friends, while Richard likely toasted to his imagined victory, the foundation under them was already beginning to crack, and by the time they noticed, it would be far too late. I closed my laptop, the glow of the screen fading into darkness. Good work, I said to the team. Go home, get some rest. Tomorrow, the real fun begins. They filed out silently, professionals to the core, leaving me alone in the quiet hum of the office. I stood by the window, staring out over the city skyline. They thought tonight had been the climax of their triumph. They had no idea it was only the opening move. The second night after the ambush dinner started like any other, with the city humming outside my penthouse window and the faint clink of ice settling in a glass of whiskey I barely touched. I sat in the leather chair facing the floor-to-ceiling windows, my phone resting silently on the side table beside me. I wasn't expecting anything urgent. The real traps had been set already. The first collapses should have begun by morning. Tonight was simply about patience. Then, the buzzing started. At first, it was a single vibration. One missed call, the screen flashing a name I didn't bother to register. I let it go. Another buzz. Another call. Then, another. Within minutes, my phone was vibrating so violently it shifted across the tabletop, dancing toward the edge. I leaned forward lazily, picked it up, and glanced at the screen. 37 missed calls. Curious, I scrolled through the caller ID list. Victoria, Richard, Jason. Half the Blackwood Industries board members. Some of the suppliers who had been attached to the company like parasites for decades. The voicemails began to pile up, one after another, blinking in the corner of the screen like desperate flares. I sipped the whiskey, letting it burn a slow trail down my throat. As I tapped the voicemail app open, the first one crackled to life. Hey, it's Jason. Look, man, can you call me back? There's some confusion at the office, and I think maybe you and I should clear the air. I mean, no hard feelings, right? I smiled coldly. Deleted it. Next voicemail. Victoria, her voice shrill and tight like she was trying to sound casual but failing miserably. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I know the other night got messy, but maybe we should talk. We can still work something out. Please call me. Deleted. The next was Richard, and he wasn't pretending at all. You vindictive little bastard, he growled, his voice low and furious. You think you're clever? You think you can pull this stunt and walk away? I made you. Without Blackwood, you're nothing. Nothing. I actually laughed out loud at that one before hitting delete. On and on they came. From anger to confusion to desperation, the tone of the messages shifted with each passing hour. By the time I hit the 60th voicemail, the panic was no longer veiled. It was full-blown terror. Apparently, Jason's appointment had lasted all of 24 hours. A diligent junior associate, whom I had anonymously tipped off that very morning, had discovered Jason's little problem with misappropriated funds from his time in Colorado. The media had gotten wind of it before lunch. By dinner, Jason's name was plastered across every financial news outlet tied neatly to Blackwood Industries. I smiled grimly, setting down my phone and taking another sip of whiskey. The first tremors had begun, right on schedule. Victoria would be discovering her frozen accounts any minute now. Richard would soon realize that his suppliers were ghosting him, contracts dissolving like sugar in hot water. My phone buzzed again. Liam this time. I picked up. "It's happening," he said without preamble. "The board is calling an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. Richard is trying to contain the Jason situation, but 3 major news outlets have already picked up the story." "And Victoria?" I asked. "Sophia says she tried to access her offshore accounts about an hour ago. She's locked out. Apparently she threw quite a fit at her financial advisor's office." I allowed myself a small smile. "Keep monitoring. I want to know every move they make." "Will do. And congratulations. First blood goes to you." After hanging up, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the city lights blink and shimmer below. For years, I had carried secrets, built my fortress in silence, while Victoria and Richard thought they held all the power. For years, I had played the game by their rules. Not anymore. Now, they would learn what it meant to face someone who had nothing left to lose, but everything to gain. The following morning, I woke to the sound of my phone ringing incessantly. It was Sophia. "You need to turn on the financial news," she said, her voice alive with a rare excitement. "Right now." I grabbed the remote and flipped to the channel. There it was, Richard Blackwood's face, tight with barely controlled rage, standing behind a podium as reporters shouted questions. "Categorically deny these allegations," he was saying, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool studio lights. "Blackwood Industries maintains the highest ethical standards, and any suggestion otherwise is—" "Mr. Blackwood," a reporter cut in, "how do you respond to the documents showing systematic bribery of Southeast Asian officials to secure manufacturing contracts?" Richard froze, his mask slipping for just a moment. Those particular documents weren't supposed to be public yet. I glanced at my phone. "Sophia, that wasn't scheduled until next week." "I know," she replied, and I could hear the smirk in her voice. "But I found something better in their servers last night. Much better. I made an executive decision." On screen, Richard was fumbling, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Those documents are fabricated. This is clearly a coordinated attack by competitors who—" "Sir, the documents bear your signature and were verified by 3 independent forensic analysts," another reporter called out. I watched as Richard's world began to collapse in real time, on national television. It was even more satisfying than I had anticipated. "Good call, Sophia," I said quietly. "Very good call." By noon, Blackwood Industries' stock had plummeted 28%. Emergency board meetings were being called. Victoria had been spotted entering her father's office building, face hidden behind large sunglasses despite the cloudy day. And Jason? Well, Jason had apparently fled the state, according to Gabriel's sources. I sat in my real office, the one at Talon Ventures, watching the chaos unfold on multiple screens. It wasn't just about watching them fall. It was about understanding every aspect of their collapse so I could step in at precisely the right moment. Because this wasn't just about revenge. This was about taking back what was mine and claiming what should have been mine all along. Liam entered without knocking, a tablet in his hand. "The board is calling for Richard's resignation. 3 major shareholders are threatening to pull out entirely unless there's a change in leadership." I nodded slowly. "And the Cohen acquisition?" "Hanging by a thread. Their CEO called this morning. They're getting cold feet with all the negative press." "Perfect," I said, standing up. "Tell Martin to move ahead with the offer. 20% above market value, but only if they sign within 48 hours. Liam raised an eyebrow. You're going after Cohen yourself? That's Richard's white whale. Exactly. He spent 5 years trying to acquire them. I'll do it in 2 days. The final pieces were falling into place. Victoria's social standing was crumbling as her friends, the same ones who had watched me being humiliated at the anniversary dinner, began to distance themselves from the scandal. Richard was fighting for his professional life, too busy trying to save his company to notice I was systematically acquiring the pieces he valued most. And Jason? Jason was just collateral damage, a pawn who didn't realize he'd been sacrificed until it was too late. By the end of the week, Blackwood Industries was in freefall. The board had called for an emergency restructuring. Richard had been forced to step down as CEO, though he remained chairman, for now. Victoria had gone suspiciously quiet. Her usual social media presence vanished overnight. And I was just getting started. The following Monday, exactly 10 days after the anniversary dinner, I walked into Blackwood Industries headquarters. Not through the side entrance or the executive elevator I used to take. No, I walked straight through the main lobby, past the reception desk where the security guard did a double take, and into the elevator. Word of my arrival spread like wildfire. By the time I reached the executive floor, people were poking their heads out of offices, whispering behind their hands. I walked past them all, my steps measured, unhurried. Richard's former assistant, Margaret, stood as I approached. Her eyes were wide, uncertain. He's in a meeting, she said automatically, then faltered. I mean, Mr. Blackwood is. I know, I replied calmly. The emergency board meeting, that's why I'm here. Before she could stop me, I pushed open the heavy double doors to the boardroom. Inside, the conversation halted abruptly. 14 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me. At the head of the table, Richard half rose from his seat, his face flushing with anger. What the hell do you think you're doing? He demanded. I smiled pleasantly, closing the door behind me. Taking my seat, of course. Richard laughed, a short, ugly sound. You have no seat here. Security. I wouldn't, I said quietly, placing my briefcase on the table and clicking it open. Not if you want Blackwood Industries to survive the week. The board members exchanged nervous glances. One of them, Patricia Winters, cleared her throat. Mr. Blackwood, perhaps we should hear what he has to say. Richard's glare could have melted steel, but he slowly sank back into his chair. 5 minutes, then you're escorted out. That's all I need, I said, pulling out a stack of documents and sliding them across the table. These are transfer of ownership papers. As of this morning, I own 37% of Blackwood Industries. The room exploded in a chorus of shocked voices. Richard lunged for the papers, scanning them frantically. Impossible, he hissed. These are forgeries. Check with your registrar, I replied calmly. I've been acquiring shares through various shells and proxies for the past 3 years. Your recent troubles simply accelerated my timeline. Patricia Winters was already on her phone, speaking quietly to someone. After a moment, she hung up and looked at me with new respect and fear. It's legitimate, she confirmed. He's now the largest single shareholder of Blackwood Industries. Richard's face had gone from red to ashen. You can't do this. This is my company. Was, I corrected gently. And technically, it was never truly yours. It was your father's. And before him, your grandfather's. You just had the good fortune to be born a Blackwood. I turned to address the board. Ladies and gentlemen, Blackwood Industries is facing a crisis. The stock has dropped 43% in 10 days. 3 major contracts have been canceled. Consumer confidence is at an all-time low. And your leadership, I nodded toward Richard, has proven inadequate to the challenge. Richard stood up so violently his chair crashed to the floor behind him. Get out, now. Richard, Patricia interrupted firmly. Sit down, we need to hear this. I continued as if the interruption hadn't occurred. I have a plan to stabilize the company, restore investor confidence, and secure our position in the market, but it requires immediate action. Specifically, it requires new leadership. I placed another document on the table. This is a motion to remove Richard Blackwood as chairman of the board, effective immediately, and to appoint me in his place. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. You can't, he stammered. It requires a majority vote, I acknowledged. But given the current circumstances, I believe the board will make the right decision. I looked around the table, meeting each member's eyes in turn. Vote now, and I promise you this. Blackwood Industries will not only survive, it will thrive. Oppose me, and I will sell every share I own at market open tomorrow. The resulting collapse in stock price will be unrecoverable. Patricia Winters was the first to speak. I move that we vote on the motion. Another board member quickly seconded. Richard stood frozen, watching his empire slip through his fingers like sand. All in favor? Patricia asked. Hands rose around the table, one, then another, then a third, until 9 hands were in the air, a clear majority. Motion carries, Patricia announced, her voice flat. I smiled, feeling a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Thank you for your trust. I won't disappoint you. Richard finally found his voice. You think you've won. This isn't over. It is over, Richard. I interrupted softly. In fact, it was over the moment you and Victoria decided to humiliate me in front of everyone. You just didn't know it yet. I turned to the board. My first action as chairman is to call for the immediate suspension of all executive bonuses until the company stabilizes. My second is to initiate a full forensic audit of all accounts, particularly those managed directly by Richard Blackwood. Richard's face went pale. You can't. I just did, I said simply. Security will escort you to your office. You have 1 hour to collect your personal belongings. I nodded to Patricia. Please continue the meeting. I have one more stop to make. Without waiting for a response, I picked up my briefcase and walked out, feeling the weight of their stares on my back. In the hallway, I paused long enough to send a text to Sophia. It's done. Start phase 2. Victoria's office was 3 floors down. I took the stairs, giving myself time to savor the moment. When I reached her floor, I walked through the marketing department where she'd insisted on having an unnecessary corner office, a symbol of her importance, bought with her father's influence. Her assistant looked up, startled. Sir, she's not... It's fine, I said, brushing past him and opening her door without knocking. Victoria was at her desk, phone pressed to her ear. When she saw me, she froze, then quickly ended the call. What are you doing here? She demanded, trying to sound authoritative but failing to hide the tremor in her voice. Checking on my wife, I said pleasantly, closing the door behind me. Ex-wife, I should say. How are you holding up, Victoria? I hear your credit cards aren't working. She flinched. How did you... I know everything, I interrupted. Your secret accounts, the apartment you rented for your rendezvous with Jason, the plans you had to take control of the East Asian division once your father pushed me out. Her eyes widened. You're bluffing. Am I? I placed my phone on her desk and played a recording. Her voice, clear as day, plotting with Jason how to convince Richard to fire me. I have hours of these, I said quietly. Years of evidence. Victoria's composure cracked. What do you want? I already have what I want, I replied. Your father's company, his legacy, your future, all mine now. The color drained from her face. He'll fight you. We'll fight you. With what? I asked gently. Your offshore accounts are frozen. Your father is being investigated for financial irregularities. Your boyfriend is facing criminal charges in 2 states. I leaned forward. You have nothing, Victoria. Just like you planned for me. She stared at me, finally seeing the man behind the mask she'd thought she knew. How long? She whispered. How long have you been planning this? Since the day I met your father, I admitted. The first time he looked at me like I was nothing, I knew this day would come. I stood up straight. The difference between us, Victoria, is that you thought you were playing chess while I was building the board. I turned to leave, then paused with my hand on the doorknob. Oh, and you might want to start packing. Company policy doesn't allow non-employees to maintain offices, and the marketing department needs the space. Without waiting for her response, I walked out, feeling lighter than I had in years. In the elevator, I called Liam. How'd it go? He asked. Exactly as planned, I replied. Is the press conference set up? 2 o'clock. All major financial networks will be there. Perfect, I said, watching the floor numbers descend. It's time to introduce the world to the real future of Blackwood Industries. By the time I reached the lobby, news of Richard's removal had already spread. Employees whispered behind their hands as I passed, equal parts fearful and curious. I nodded politely to each of them, already planning the company-wide address I would give the following day. Outside, I paused on the steps of the building that now belonged to me in all but name. The same steps where, 10 years ago, Richard had reluctantly shaken my hand and welcomed me to the family, never imagining that one day I would take everything from him. I looked up at the gleaming skyscraper, at the Blackwood name emblazoned across the top in bold letters. Soon, that would change too. I took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air and smiled. The long game was over, and I had won. If you've enjoyed the story of calculated revenge and the ultimate long game, please consider sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced betrayal that made you stronger in the end? What would you have done in this situation? Don't forget to subscribe